My name is Jordan and I'm going into my senior year at Grosse Pointe North High School. My whole life I've attended some of the best school districts in the state and I'm currently in my 5th school district. All the schools I've attended have been in predominantly white suburban areas where quality education was never a concern for my family. And as I was going into my 9th grade, I moved from Walled Lake to downtown Detroit, which landed me in the Detroit public school system. I decided I would attend Renaissance High School, which is considered one of the best in the district, but upon my transition it became clear that I would be entering something that was unfamiliar to me. Where I was used to entering school and seeing my friends before heading to class at my previous schools, at Renaissance I would enter the school, immediately get in line to walk through a metal detector, which was surrounded by security guards who were ready to check my bag. That alone was a big switch to a more strict and surveillance environment instead of the freedoms I was familiar with. At my previous districts, it seemed as though resources for education, such as computers, access to printers, and updated textbooks were all a given, knowing that these are all essential to an exceptional learning experience. However, at Renaissance, these customs were scarce. And to add on, a lot of my teachers seemed overwhelmed or unmotivated at times as they were underpaid and often had to supply students with educational tools using money coming out of their own pockets. And keep in mind, this is one of the elite schools of the district. Throughout the year, I witnessed far more concerning things when my basketball team would travel to other schools for games. Many schools were severely broken down, with broken floors, falling ceiling tiles, leaks, and far more things I had the privilege to not experience myself. My experience at Renaissance eventually led me to leave the district, which is something not all students have the ability to do. And it wasn't until I moved from Detroit to its neighboring district, Grosse Pointe, where I realized how severe the inequalities in education were. This shock led me to do some research, where I learned about the lack of equitable funding in the state, how wealthier communities are better off in terms of education due to contributions such as property taxes, and that despite being borders, Grosse Pointe and Detroit have the largest divide in poverty in the entire nation. As I researched deeper, I realized that the lengthy history between the cities of Grosse Pointe and Detroit revealed the larger picture of educational inequalities we have today, and how it has stemmed from racism. Detroit began to take off starting with the boom in the auto industry in the early 1900s, and its population continued to increase until around the 1950s. At its peak, Detroit's population reached almost 2 million residents. Because of this, the school district was forced to create many new schools to hold its actively changing population of students. The downfall of the Detroit Public School District began with the white flight. As people of color began to move to Detroit in search for jobs and to escape racial discrimination such as Jim Crow, they were not welcome into Detroit's white neighborhoods. This, the civil rights movement, and growing racial tension between the city and the police sparked off a mass exodus of the white population to suburbs such as Grosse Pointe. Between 1950 and 2020, Detroit's population decreased tremendously by over 1 million people. This dramatic shift in population left schools underpopulated and eventually led to the closures of hundreds of schools. These school closures would leave a large economic strain on the district and is a large reason why they're struggling today. On the other hand, Grosse Pointe benefited from the white flight and would create systems in place to keep out families of color, such as redlining and the point system, which made it nearly impossible to attain housing if you weren't white and came from wealth. To put the severity of the white flight in perspective, the white population in Detroit fell 95% between 1950 and the 2000s. And further proof that the educational differences is also connected to racial issues is that while Detroit is 79% black and about 15% white, Grosse Pointe is about 90% white and less than 3% black. And Detroit Public Schools today is the nation's worst performing urban school area, while Grosse Pointe is ranked with some of the highest nationally. The Grosse Pointe community continues to face racial issues, as parts of the community actively fight against racial progression in education, while the district itself has done little to combat racial issues and often sweeps racist incidents under the rug in order to maintain a clean image. I think it's clear that both Detroit Public Schools and Grosse Pointe have their own unique issues to fix. However, students like myself should not have to give up a community that was accepting of my own identity in exchange for a quality education. Recently, Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed an executive order declaring racism as a public health crisis. This executive order created the Black Leadership Advisory Council, which will work alongside the governor to develop, review, and recommend policies designed to eradicate and prevent racial discrimination in Michigan. I believe this executive order is really important and could potentially solve or vastly minimize a lot of the inequities in education that we see today. With this in mind, I researched some policies needed to promote equity provided by the Michigan League of Public Policy. These policies consist of creating a two-generation educational agenda that addresses literacy levels and educational achievement for parents and their children, including access to post-secondary education for parents through financial aid, access to high-quality childcare, early literacy support for children to improve reading by 3rd grade, and services to improve parent literacy skills. Another important policy includes fully funding the state's at-risk school program and provide other funds needed to improve high-poverty schools and serve students who have faced racial and economic barriers to success. Another policy includes investing in the early years of life, including access to affordable, high-quality child care services, early intervention services such as Early On, and programs to address young children's social and emotional growth and development. And finally, adopting and enforcing school disciplinary policies that reduce inequities in suspension and expulsions, including policies for preschool-aged children and restorative justice practices. To wrap this all up, I think we should reflect on the big questions. Why are racist events from the past still holding down students of color today? Is it acceptable that students receive better or worse education based on the areas they reside in? When will our leaders step in and say, enough is enough, and actually enact on these issues? There are many questions to be answered, but there's one thing we know for sure. Education is the base of our community. Students today will grow up to be our politicians, doctors, businessmen, and much more. If we want progression, to move forward, and to live in a better society, then I know we cannot let educational injustice pursue in the future.